Continuing from the last session, let's move ahead to create a case cluster. In the previous video, we have already created Azure Service Principal. So we will move ahead with the following steps, which includes getting the ACR resource ID, granting the reader role to Service Principal, then creating the actual AKS cluster, and we will also see how to connect to AKS cluster. So first step is grab the container registry resource ID. This can be done by using following command. This will show the resource ID of our container registry which we have just created in the previous video. Copy that particular URL and store it into another variable named as myACRID. We'll just verify it once whether it is properly stored or not using command echo $myACRID. As we can see, it is properly stored. We are good to go ahead with second step. Second step includes granting the reader role for our service principal. This can be achieved using Azure role assignment command. Here in this command we will specify the app ID app ID of service principal which we have just copied some time ago in our previous video. We will specify the role as reader and we have to specify most important argument, that is nothing but our ACR ID which we have just copied or created a variable few minutes ago. So two important things, we have to specify assignee which is nothing but service principal app ID, and we are going to also specify the scope which is nothing but our ACR ID. You will get some output on the screen. It means this role is properly assigned to our service principal. Once we created role assignment, we will move ahead with creating a case cluster. This can be achieved by command. As a case create, we have to specify our cluster name, we have to specify resource group, we have to specify number of nodes in the cluster, which is 1 for me right now. You can specify a number you want. We are going to specify another command line option, that is generate SSH keys. We will also specify service principal option which is nothing but app ID of our service principal. And we are going to provide a password which we have just copied in previous video for our service principal under option client secret. Make sure you are not sharing those information with anyone. Otherwise, whoever having access to those service principal would be able to access your cluster. As you can see, there is a line SSH key files id_rsa and id_rsa.pub have been generated under SSH directory. Those files will help us to access VMs which are created under AKS cluster. So make sure you are storing those files at safe location. This command will take almost 5 to 6 minutes. And you will see some output after 5 to 6 minutes on your screen. It means your AKS cluster is successfully created. We will see how to access our newly created AKS cluster. For that, Azure already provided us command which is nothing but as a AKS get credentials, specify the cluster name, also specify the resource group in which that cluster resides. For us, name of our cluster is myAKS cluster and resource group is mykuberg. This command will create a file in your home directory under .kube hidden directory named as config file. This config file contains all the information to access the cluster. You can check the nodes of your AKS cluster using the command kubectl get nodes. As you can see, we are having one node in our cluster. As you can see on the screen, status is ready. It means it is ready to deploy applications on our cluster. So it hardly takes 3 to 5 minutes to set up that AKS cluster, a single node AKS cluster. For bigger cluster like 10 nodes, when I tested, it took around 20 minutes. So you can plan accordingly. You can also see the version over there, which is nothing but 1.16.10. kubectl get all will give us all the information about pods, services, as well as deployment. So right now you can see one service is already available, known as Kubernetes, which is a default service, comes up with Kubernetes cluster. That's it for setting up Azure Kubernetes cluster as well as Azure Container Registry. Thank you for watching. We'll talk more about monitoring, scaling, upgrading services, pods, deployment in upcoming sessions.